we'll look at the second version of a story that we actually didn't read that long ago. So sometimes we read parallel stories in the same day because they're woven together texts of two different authors telling a story, and sometimes they're very far away, like a story in Samuel that also is in Psalms. Excuse me. In this case, we're reading a part of Isaiah today that we read. We read a version. Yeah, hold it a second. I'm trying to go on Facebook, and it says that I have not completed authorization. This is not good because it's not letting me. Let me try one thing, folks. It's not letting me post on Facebook, which is not good. So yeah,
Sun's out here. How about there?
No.
Not here.
Just came out.
My window looks toward Santa Clarita, where it's still gray. Maybe if I could look the other way, it'd be sunnier.
I mean, it's still gray in the background, but I do have shadows.
Hold it a second, folks. I'm trying to get Reverend Lynn is here today. Reverend Lynn.
Reverend
We were
Lynn.
talking about you this weekend, Reverend Lynn. We missed you. No, well, we needed you. We were at the tree. We were at Old Glory, but you had a previous commitment. I was at the tree, and the only other clergy person that they talked about was Reverend Lynn.
But she was.
They did. No, she did not sit in the tree. But exactly, her son-in-law was in the tree. Yeah, he was. Oh yeah, a lot. Yeah, one of the things they didn't talk about at the tree was that he was not in the tree the entire 72 days. There were other people who went up there. There was 10 other people who took turns. It kind of takes away from the drama and the
So how many people did sit in the tree and how many people got arrested?
10 others. Nobody else got arrested. The whole thing.
Besides you.
Yeah, but I got arrested, but I wasn't booked. And I wasn't booked for being in the tree. I was arrested for
That's true.
trespassing. I was taken for trespassing, but I wasn't taken for anything other than that. And he wasn't arrested in the end either. I mean, he was arrested, he wasn't charged. But what happened is that I didn't have oh no, it's not giving me the ability to post today. There's some setting issue. What I was going to say is the whole last night of him getting arrested and literally chainsawed out of the tree was, and the tree wasn't chainsawed. The thing that he was locked to, the essentially the way he had chained himself into the tree was sawed through. That was some kind, in a way that was kind of theater, but no, the reason I got taken away was because his girlfriend Susan was thrown down to the ground by the sheriff's officers, and I ran off to try to stop them from throwing her on the ground, and that's when I got tackled from behind. So
Of course, right. Save someone who's being brutalized.
yeah, I was only taken to the hospital, not taken even to the station. So I was in the back of the car, and they took me to the hospital just to get checked out, because I think they were more worried about a lawsuit than they were anything else. Well, I was told that was a possibility when I ran out there, that I was going to get arrested, but no one was doing anything. It made me think about something too, that if I had been at the Academy Awards and watched, Chris Rock get hit, would I have jumped up and done anything? Because Jimmy Kimmel made a joke at the Oscars that he basically said, everybody just do exactly what you did last year, nothing. And I thought to myself, he's kind of right, that like nobody did anything. It wasn't like somebody did anything. I just wondered, I mean, I think to some extent you're shocked and you're not expecting it. So at a situation where there are police officers or sheriff's officers, you expect something to happen. But so, you know, that was a little different. But I wonder if I would have done anything. Like, I wonder if I had seen somebody get assaulted, whether I would have gotten up and done anything.
And I think, Frank, the audience, that it was just part of
The theater of it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I think that is also what people thought, was like, no, there's no way that this wasn't staged. So yeah, I think that's probably, I
For a
can't,
rabbi, wasn't
Yeah.
that the time they went, you're not really a rabbi? Wasn't that that time?
I don't remember. I honestly, yeah, I think maybe. But anyways, John looked really good. I mean, he's stayed in good shape. It was he's an artist, it says. I don't know what, I know that he had a documentary film crew following him around at this event. So I don't know if they're doing something about it, but he did make a good point, which was that, you know, this event really did, the tree situation really brought people together. And there were people from all across the political spectrum who were, you know, who wanted to save the tree. There were a lot of people that you know, that worked together to you know, to allow us to save the tree. You know, I have to say it, you know, and I said it even, I didn't, you know, it's 20 years, but like part of me thinks like the tree could still be dead. I mean, like we're all going crazy, but the tree has enough nutrients in it, I think, to be alive for decades. So even with its roots cut down, it could have still, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if maybe they've done enough studies now to know whether that tree is going to survive, but to me, it still felt kind of like a Pyrrhic victory, because it didn't really, like, they still took it down, and it's still like, it displays this kind of hubris that we have towards nature, which is like, well, you can fix it, but you know, you can do everything you want and then still fix it, which I think is what our attitude is with the environment right now, which is that somebody's going to come along and figure out a way for us to undo the damage that we're doing right now, when we know that if you just took a few steps, we could undo this damage. So the whole mentality of it is just indicative of what the problem is we have as human beings. And we do it all the time. I mean, we do it in almost every aspect of our life. So we just figure, well, somebody's going to come around and fix this. Somebody's going to, you know, when we know what we have to do. So I'll just do the damage a little bit longer, and then I'll go to the doctor, you know, and get that fixed. You know, I'll just wait for it to be a, you know, a situation where I really have to go to the doctor. I mean, we do it all the time in so many areas of our lives. I mean, I do it. Everybody does it. It's just like, well, when it gets to be a real problem, then we'll fix it. When you can just go, well, maybe just stop, you know, eating that right now, or doing that, you know, do something to intervene now rather than, you know, wait till you have to have an angioplasty. So I don't know what to say other than, like, I was happy to be at the tree. I mean, I go by there all the time. I ride my bike there. I walk past it. It's a quarter of a mile from my house, so I'm there all the time. It's not like I haven't been there a lot, but being there with everybody else there was nice in a way, but also it was sad in a way, because I feel like we still just don't get it. But it was nice. Yeah, there was a good crowd. There was a decent amount of people. A couple people from our temple were there. Philip Wasserman was there. I guess they're not going to be here today. Tim and Marcia were there. And saw a lot of people. Lynn Planbeck was there, Barbara Wampole, a lot of the people that worked at saving the tree in the first place. I mean, John was invited out there by people in our community who thought about ways to try to save the tree. It wasn't like John just, you know, all of a sudden knew there was a tree that needed to be saved. That was a coordinated activity by environmental folk in I would say activists, you know, people, concerned citizens in our community who said, let's try to save this tree. So and they were there the whole time. I mean, they were, and John gave them credit. It's not like he didn't give them credit, but there was a lot more to this story than one person. And you know, I also felt kind of, it was weird because I was supposed to go in the tree that Sunday. I was supposed to go in and stay overnight. And like, I don't know, they had decided, a couple of days before, a week before, the sheriff's department and John Lang Holmes, that they were going to clear him out that night, which could have been any night. But I was 2 days away from doing my shift. I never stayed overnight. I had gone up in the tree. I'd learned how to go up. You had to kind of train in belaying and like rock climbing kind of gear. So I'd done that, but I was actually supposed to stay overnight. That weekend, it was Tu B'Shvat. It was the holiday of the trees. It was a perfect time for me to go up. I don't know what would have happened, because the whole purpose of it was to kind of raise the profile of it, and to, maybe the Jewish community would pay a little bit more attention to it, because a rabbi was up in a tree. It was Tu B'Shvat. And so then it never happened. And to some extent, I also wanted there to be like recognition that, yeah, the Jewish community is also part of the environmental community, and that didn't happen either. But one of the documentarians who was there that day on Saturday, it was Saturday afternoon when we did it this last weekend. It was Shabbat, and I talked about Shabbat. I talked about the Shemitah year, about how every 7 years the land has to have a Shabbat. One of the documentarians was young Jewish woman. She says, I'm about to have a baby, and, talking about teaching her kids about the environment. She says, I didn't know there was a Jewish holiday of the trees. And I go, yeah. So, you think about the learning opportunities that you have when you do something like that. And also that officially it starts Wednesday night is Rosh Chodesh, or Tuesday. Wednesday night is Rosh Chodesh, the new month. This month that's coming up is the month of Nisan, right? It's a Jewish month of Nisan, the month of Passover. It means that Passover is 2 weeks away. Ugh, got a lot of stuff to do between now and 2 weeks, but Passover is coming up. And there's actually a Jewish tradition, the Iraqi Jewish community every year at Rosh Chodesh Nisan would go out into the field, into the orchards and into the fields forest was the right word, but where there were trees, and they would bless the trees. It was Rosh Chodesh Nisan was the time for blessing the trees. So I found an old blessing, ancient blessing of the trees, and I offered that blessing on Saturday, because it was just before springtime, which happy spring, everybody. And it's also Rosh Chodesh. It's the correspondence too with Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the month of spring. So definitely thinking about that right now. I mentioned Friday night, and I definitely want to think about it this year and encourage people. I'm going to try to think about it more, because we actually had seasons this year in California, that maybe this year, as we go through the Jewish calendar, to think more about the natural world, to think more about, sometimes we do holidays, especially I think in Southern California. The Nathans don't have to worry about this because they're in New York, where they do have seasons, but we don't really have seasons, and we really don't think about the natural cycle as we're going through the holidays. We go through Rosh Hashanah, and we go through, come around to this time of year, and go through Sukkot, and we don't think about the seasons that much. We don't actually think about the natural world. We do our holidays, and when I say we, I mean me. Like just natural. We think about the holidays, and we don't think about what they represent on the seasonal calendar. We don't think about what they mean on the way that we mark, or the way humanity marked time from the beginning, which is with a sensitivity to what was going on in the natural world. Like now, we don't care. We have air conditioning and heaters, and whatever temperature we want it to be is what temperature it is. And this, yeah, we used to eat that way. Exactly. We used to eat that. We used to live that way. We used to sleep that way. And we're so disconnected from that. I just want, maybe this year, I was thinking and encouraging people to think about to really think about the seasons, because we really had them this year. We really had a chance to experience the seasons, the winter, and maybe we will in the spring. We'll have a chance to really smell and taste and experience the seasons this year. So I'm going to try to be more cognizant of that this Passover. Because the season's a time of thinking about the Exodus and thinking about the historical events of Passover. But for our ancestors, it was really a spring festival, just like the fall festivals and the other festivals. It was about really thinking about, I hope this is a really good year for the harvest. I hope we really are able to have a good season.
Wasn't Passover the harvest of one of the first grains?
It was the barley harvest, and it was the most important harvest, because the barley harvest was when people would literally get the main cereal grain that they needed for their life once they started planting stuff, because barley was the cheaper and the more hardy grain that people could plant and eat, and they would plant that and start reaping it at this time of year, a couple weeks. And that would basically mean whether they could eat or survive. The next harvest was the wheat harvest at Shavuot, 7 weeks later. And that was a wealthier crop. It was a crop not for people who, the average guy, the average woman did not get to eat wheat normally. So the wheat bread, the bread that came from wheat and the stuff that came from wheat was fancier. It was for the wealthier people. It was more expensive grain. And that harvest was only one day. The Passover harvest was 7 days.
Was matzah originally barley flour?
Probably everything that people ate in those days was probably more likely to be from barley. And then the last harvest, the harvest of Sukkot, was the fruit harvest and the harvest of pretty much everything else. And that was another week, because it was real important. It was a real important, the fall harvest. By then, everything had to be in. And then the cycle would start again. And so for our ancestors, this was, the rabbis are the ones who laid on the other historical reasons, the Exodus, the living in the wilderness, getting the Torah, the other reasons we celebrated those harvest holidays. But for our ancestors, it was about food. It was about living.
For the barley harvest, people don't eat barley very much
Nope.
anymore. But maybe we would
Had it for dinner.
do some barley recipes for the barley.
That's a great idea. Reverend Lynn wants some barley recipes.
I
Yeah,
just made barley this weekend.
supposedly, if we ate more barley, we might not have as many gluten problems. That's what somebody I read, and it makes sense, because again, as Reverend Lynn's saying, I mean, this is the way we've been eating. We're in the last few generations taking ourselves off of the human cycle of how we ate during the seasons, and our bodies seem to have a hard time adjusting to it. Because guess what? Thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, of human development, don't lie. Our bodies aren't equipped to eat the way we have been eating for the last few generations. So it is something to think about.
For California agriculture, which has, due to the drought, has had limited amounts of water, and California is the biggest agricultural state in the country. So this year, they may be able to actually start making some money, exporting more food.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to, yes, as Sheldon is saying, hopefully this year will be a better year for California farmers. There's definitely a disconnect we have, because we don't think of ourselves as an agricultural state. We think of ourselves as a entertainment state, as a Silicon Valley, but we are an agricultural powerhouse, and hopefully this will, at least for now, take a little bit of the pressure off of the fight between the coastal California and the interior California, which have very different agendas, very different political feelings, and very different agendas. I will tell you that it's still, in my estimation, we still better figure out a way to desalinate real soon. Because if we don't, this is gonna go back to,
We also need, even though they say the drought officially is almost over, that we've gotten enough rain, we need to pretend we need to not reduce drought restrictions.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So we're living in a time when people are, we know a lot more, we're able to do a lot more, but we actually have to do it. And Tim and Marcia just made it in. So we were just talking about, as we were waiting for everybody to come in, that and again, we still can't get on Facebook, that Reverend Lynn was missed. I said at guys, Marcia, wasn't Reverend Lynn missed this Saturday? People talked about her, right? There was a lot of people that were talking about her because Reverend Lynn was one of the clergy people who made a big statement with her church. Yes. Well, somebody also told me that they stopped going to St. Stephen's when she left, but I'm not going to say, I shouldn't say that, but anyway.
Definitely a conversation.
Okay, this is up now.
Tell you,
Yes.
a beautiful part of the whole day is Rabbi got to tell his story, but he got to tell it with Hebrew and Bible, okay? And that's unusual for our community. And he was the sole person. There was nobody else there. So he got to recite beautiful from Genesis. You guys probably, have you seen it? It's on Facebook. And it was, Mark, I'm still talking about it. I told your sister yesterday. Just beautiful, 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 beautiful. You have a chance, listen to it on Facebook.
So listen, there was part of this issue for me was doing it on a Shabbat, which look, it was a religious event, so I didn't have an issue doing that. So look, it wasn't a synagogue event, but it was definitely a religious event. And as Marcia said, how else would I have been able to talk? How would I else? There was no other way I was going to be able to quote the Torah and to be able to share the documentary. When they talked to me, the documentary person, I was talking about the story of Honi, the circle maker who told people, why are you planting a tree? You're going to have 70 years. It's going to be 70 years. It's a very famous story from the Talmud where Honi saw a guy planting a carob tree and he says, why are you planting that tree? You're never going to be able to eat from that tree. It takes 70 years for it to have fruit. And the guy said, when I came into the world, there were trees. Somebody planted them for me. I have to plant them for other people. So Honi, who was a miracle worker, who was considered to be like one of these magical rabbis, he's kind of put in his place by this guy. And it's a good lesson. Actually, the story is that Honi actually got punished because he didn't understand this he was kind of selfish, that God had him fall asleep for 70 years. He pulled a Rip Van Winkle on him and he woke up and it wasn't fun. Honi sees the guy with the tree next to him and right where he saw the thing planted, he goes, how did that tree grow up? All of a sudden, in one day, it's a miracle. The guy said, what are you talking about? My grandfather planted this tree. And then Honi got the chills because he realized he was the one who got transported and everyone he knew was dead. And it was not fun. He did not like it. He did not like to be in a world where he was didn't know anybody. So he was punished for his attitude. So Honi learned a lesson. Anyways,
His hubris.
Yeah, his hubris. I didn't tell that part of the Honi story. We teach the kids the Honi story, but we don't tell them the part where he woke up 70 years later, which is an interesting lesson. So don't have that attitude about the world. Yeah, it's a beautiful line. There were trees planted in my world, and so I plant for those to come. So yeah, anyways, it was important to be there. Johnny Appleseed, yeah. Except the guy that we don't, the guy, the unnamed guy is the guy who taught him the lesson. I think I love those stories in the Talmud because those are stories that are like, they're not about a famous person. I mean, Honi was famous in his lifetime, but he wasn't like a biblical guy. It's not like most people had heard of Honi. But I like these stories because they're like the stories of the rabbis either learning a lesson or, getting kind of taught a lesson, or again, remembering that, because there is, I haven't talked about it a lot. There hasn't really been a place to talk about it, but I was going to think of maybe share something today. There was this understanding in the rabbinic period that the rabbis were like, they were doing the right thing and everyone else was not doing the right thing. And this is where you get in the Christian Bible, when Jesus talks about the Pharisees, which he's like a Pharisee. I mean, he's been taught by Pharisees, but the attitude of the Pharisees is his issue, which is like, you're not above the people, you're not, but there is this sense in the Talmud of the rabbi sometimes talking about the people like they're idiots. And then there are these stories there where the rabbis get taught a lesson by the common people. Yeah.
True story.
Yep. But we call them in Hebrew, the term for them is Am Haaretz. Am Haaretz means a person of the land, a person of the, it means the commonplace. It's the riffraff. It's the despicables. And there really was this sense, though, that the rabbis sometimes saw themselves as and again, maybe it's because they were reading and studying this and actually trying to learn this. I always kind of wonder, and I was thinking about it today with today's class, today's text, how many people in the ancient world were really literate? And I know that there are debates, amongst people in the world that, like maybe 1% of the population in the world up until a few generations ago was actually literate in whatever language that there was. They could speak it, right? But they couldn't read it. They didn't have ever a chance to read. So that's an important issue because we take it for granted that people are going to sit around and read this and they can read books and they can read whatever they want. But the people really weren't that literate. So I wonder sometimes how many people. What?
Isn't that why the Torah is divided into parts? Because we didn't do chapter and verse the way.
Yeah, but
because
the question
people could quote Torah, but couldn't read it.
Yeah, but so that's a question that I have, right? Is, and well, we're going to get to it in a few chapters because as we're going to see, we have a repetition of another part of the Bible. That's like today's thing. We're going to get to chapter 37, 38, 39, which are repetitions of what we read in Kings. So one of the questions I have for myself, and maybe you'll have this question, who would have known that, so it's in Isaiah, and then it's also in Kings. Nobody is going to do what we're going to do, which is look at the two different texts side by side and say, well, which one is the earlier text? Which one was the text? Because one was first. There's no question that they're based on the same text. They're virtually similar, the same. Which text was first? But the bigger issue is, did anyone know? Would anyone have known that it's in Isaiah and in Kings? What would be the environment that someone would have had that? Because they would have been in different scrolls. They would not have been in the same scroll. They definitely wouldn't have been able to do what we're going to do, which is put the two texts up side by side and say, oh, well, that's missing from there and that's not in there. We don't know. So we don't know, but let's say, well, it's not only how many years were there in between the two, but how many years were there before the edited version of either of these two were there? And we don't know. I mean, I read and I went through it again over the last few days before today. There are different feelings about which one was the earlier one and then how long it took for them to make their appearance.
Has anyone published those side by side?
No, I looked through to see if there's nothing online, at least. There might be some, I found a doctoral dissertation by a student who was originally from Korea, who wrote a lot of great Korean Bible scholars, by the way. There's a huge kind of disproportionate amount of Korean Bible scholars, especially Old Testament Bible scholars. Anyways, so I found a couple of interesting dissertations on it, but there's not the side by side like they do with the Gospels, where where you have the where you can lay them out and see them next to each other. What's in one and what's What's the gospel one though called? I forgot. There's gospel parallels. And there's like a famous version of it that people use all the time. But yeah, the gospel parallels, I love that. Yeah, we don't have a lot of that in the biblical. Yeah. And there's a lot more at stake. In this, again, the consequences of the different versions are, well, is there an agenda that one author had versus another author and leaving this part out or leaving that? And it's more, there's feelings about it. There's opinions. I don't know that there's even really a good answer. But the point is that did people know? Did people know that there were different versions of it? And one of the things, it's very hard to know how literate the common person, average, ordinary citizen during the time of Isaiah, how much they read. What we do know is we found ostraca, and it's not like, for people to say from this, all of this, they extrapolate some crazy stuff off of this. But we did excavate a place called Tel Arad, which is in the Negev, and it was a city in Judah, in the kingdom of Judah, that was a military outpost. It was a fort in the Negev, and it's from about the time of Isaiah. And we found their ostraca with letters, with notes on them. They're potsherds that people wrote on, like paper, like scrap paper. And what's interesting about it is that the ostraca are just there's nothing like important in it. It's just kind of notes about how much supply somebody's supposed to get. But what people have taken from that is that there was a high level of literacy amongst the soldiers. So it wasn't just priests who were literate, it was also these guys, that they were literate. They could ask for supplies, they could write letters. Now, I don't want to say that means everyone was literate, because that's what some people have said, is that proves that there was, it's kind of commonplace literacy. I just don't know if that was the case. I'm not 100% sold on that. I don't know if the average ordinary farmer that we were talking about before, the guys that were celebrating Sukkot and Passover and bringing their crops there, I don't know that they were literate. I think it's difficult to know that during the time of Isaiah that they were literate. I'm not sold on that. On the other hand, we don't know. We can't say that they weren't. But I just know that nobody would have said, well, wait a second, we just read that in Kings. No one would have said that. Nobody would have said that. And no one says it today, because very rarely do people do what we're doing right now, which is go page by page and read every page of the Bible. So most people don't do that. They don't even do it in studying for biblical studies in college and university. I'm telling you this, I know, I was there. They don't do it. They let people on their own kind of read the Bible and study it. And by the way, most people are in their PhD programs for Bible at university. They've already read the Bible. I mean, most of them are ministers or people who are already steeped in an interest in the Bible. But first of all, there aren't a lot of Jewish Bible professors in the country. There aren't many. There are a handful. There aren't many. And most of the people who study the Bible in yeshiva are not studying it like this. There's whole parts of the Bible that they're not reading regularly. They're not reading it like Kings. And so there is a huge gap in the knowledge that people would have, where they'd even say, hey, did you know that Kings and Kings 22 and Isaiah 37 are the same? No, they don't know that. And they definitely haven't read it like you have within a few months of each other. That being said, again, it's also not part of Jewish history that most people know, other than maybe a footnote, which is, yeah, the Jews survived a siege by the Assyrians. The north was destroyed. Judah was laid siege to. Lots of the cities were destroyed. And then they survived for another 150 years. That's all people know, if they know that. What's interesting about this today is that we have the King's version that we read, the Isaiah version we're going to read today. We have the version in Chronicles. There's actually a third version of it in the Bible, in Chronicles. 3 versions in the Bible of this scene. And what's so crazy about it is there's a 4th version of it, the Assyrian version of it that we have in the British Museum. So what's interesting about this is that this little footnote in history, in Jewish history, I don't know if it's a footnote, but this 2-sentence write-up of this incident, we actually have a lot of versions of it. We have the different accounts of this story that we can lay down side by side and try to figure out what's going on here. So let's get to that. We haven't gotten there yet, but I have been thinking about it a lot because it gets to this issue of who wrote the Bible, why was it written, where did it come from, and I guess at the end of the day, what does it mean? What does it mean that there are slightly different versions of these stories? Well, let's take a look. So we left off as Isaiah. This is the last part of Isaiah that we're reading today, and this is as we've been reading Isaiah, the last part of first Isaiah, of what we call first Isaiah, giving his lessons to other countries we read about over the last couple of weeks, and now to Judah. He's teaching them, look, things are about to get bad, and then he kind of always pulls back and say, but it'll be okay. So here's chapter 33. Rosemary, if you take it away.
Ha, you ravager who are not ravaged, you betrayer who have not been betrayed. When you have done ravaging, you shall be ravaged. When you have finished betraying, you shall be betrayed. Oh, Lord, be gracious to us. It is to you we have looked. Be their arm every morning, also our deliverance in time of stress. At your roaring, peoples have fled. Before your majesty, nations have scattered, and spoil was gathered as locusts are gathered. It was amassed as grasshoppers are amassed.
We think about that at Passover coming up, the plagues of locusts, but you can see it's always in the back of people's minds that these locusts are out there. Yep.
The Lord is exalted. He dwells on high. Of old, he filled Zion with justice and righteousness. Faithfulness to your charge was her wealth, wisdom and devotion, her triumph. Reverence for the Lord, that was her treasure.
Those are beautiful descriptions of Jerusalem, of the kingdom. Yeah, that's what it should be.
Hark, the Arielites cry aloud. Shalom's messengers weep bitterly. Highways are desolate. Wayfarers have ceased. A covenant has been renounced. Cities rejected. Mortal man despised. The land is wilted and withered. Lebanon disgraced and moldering. Sharon has become like a desert, and Bashan and Carmel are stripped bare. Now I will arise, says the Lord. Now I will exalt myself. Now raise myself high.
And again, all of these other areas that have been destroyed. And again, Arielites, Shalom's messenger, these are all, you can see, synonyms for Jerusalem. But Isaiah says, look, everything else has been destroyed. Sharon, which is the area in the north, along the coast, around north from Tel Aviv up north, that's like a desert, and that's a beautiful area where there's farms and fields. Bashan and Carmel, that's all the way up in the north, up in the Galilee and up in the Golan. It's all been wasted. Even the Lebanon, right, is done. And now God's saying, and again, he's talking about all the stuff the Assyrians had done already. The Assyrians had destroyed all these lands. Now we're gonna get serious. God's gonna wake up.
You shall conceive hay, give birth to straw. My breath will devour you like fire. Peoples shall be burnings of lime, thorns cut down that are set on fire. Hear, you who are far, what I have done. You who are near, note my might. Sinners in Zion are frightened. The godless are seized with trembling. Who of us can dwell with the devouring fire? Who of us can dwell with the never-dying blaze? He who walks in righteousness, speaks uprightly, spurns profit from fraudulent dealings, waves away a bribe instead of grasping it, stops his ears against listening to infamy, shuts his eyes against looking at evil. Such a one shall dwell in lofty security, with inaccessible cliffs for his stronghold, with his food supplied and his drink assured. Your throat shall, when your eyes behold a king in his beauty, when they contemplate the land round about, your throat shall murmur in awe, where is one who could count? Where is one who could weigh? Where is one who could count all these towers? No more shall you see the barbarian folk, the people of speech too obscure to comprehend, so stammering of tongue that they are not understood. When you gaze upon Zion, our city of assembly, your eyes shall behold Jerusalem as a secure homestead, a tent not to be transported, whose pegs shall never be pulled up, and none of whose ropes shall break. For there the Lord in his greatness shall be for us, like a region of rivers, of broad streams, where no floating vessels can sail, and no mighty craft can travel. Their ropes are slack. They cannot steady the sockets of their masts. They cannot spread a sail. For the Lord shall be our ruler. The Lord shall be our prince. The Lord shall be our king. He shall deliver us.
Yeah.
Then shall indeed
Oh, wait,
much.
hold it 1 second. So,
Okay.
again, humal kenu, humoshienu. These are words that we use for, for prayer a lot. God is our ruler. I would say our prince is probably not a great. God is our king. God is our redeemer, our deliverer. Those are words that we use in our prayers, versions of that. All right.
Then shall indeed much spoil be divided. Even the lame shall seize booty, and none who lives there shall say, I am sick. It shall be inhabited by folk whose sin has been forgiven.
Yeah. So, again, this is one of his prophecies where things look really bleak right now, but they're going to get better. And again, this is especially true from Isaiah, the second Isaiah, from Deutero Isaiah that we're about to read in the coming weeks, but it is true in the first Isaiah as well. It's just the language is slightly different. There is some that's the same, and that's why, why they could be merged together into two Isaiahs. But you'll see some stock phrases in second Isaiah that we don't see in the first Isaiah. But some of them will. There are phrases that'll be in both. So that's chapter 33. Again, similar to some of the things that we've heard in the past. These messages for Judah, for the kingdom of Judah, and specifically in some cases, again, for his hometown crowd of Jerusalem. All right.
Approach, O nations, and listen. Give heed, O peoples. Let the earth and those in it hear, the world and what it brings forth. For the Lord is angry at all the nations, furious at all their host. He has doomed them, consigned them to slaughter. Their slain shall be left lying, and the stench of their corpses shall mount, and the hills shall be drenched with their blood. All the host of heaven shall molder. The heavens shall be rolled up like a scroll, and all their host shall wither like a leaf withering on the vine, or a shriveled fruit on a fig tree.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting, it's kind of an interesting phrase. It shows here that the scroll from Qumran is a little different. It seems as though, like, if you read this the way it is right here, it seems to indicate that like something like the angels are also not doing well. The way that it exists in the Qumran scroll is more of, this is not really about angels, but more about the weather. Or comparing what's going on to in the world, like the destruction that's going on is reflected in heaven as well. But not necessarily the angels are like that. Look, it goes along with a teaching that we start to have in the Bible, and then in the Talmud that we see reflected, is that the nations of the world are all represented by an angel in heaven. And so when the nation that they're representing is not doing well, that's because they're not doing well. So every nation has a angel, right? And so those angels fight amongst themselves sometimes, which is why the people fight. It's reflected in the stars, right? So there's a star in heaven that, if that star is ascending, that nation is ascending. Those are the angels. It's represented in the sky. Yeah.
I have a question. In the beginning, those last couple lines above, it painted this really beautiful picture and it, everybody was forgiven, and then it goes to this.
Yeah, so that's why it's a different chapter, right? And that's why people have marked these sometimes and say, well, that's one prophecy, that's one section. Sometimes they work well like that, like they just did, and it's easy to see. And then sometimes the chapters are like, well, that's not the end. And I've pointed that out a couple of times where it says, like, well, that's not the end of that idea. And so sometimes it's pretty clear that, like, he comes to the end and says it'll all be okay, and then the next one starts, because these were different prophecies that Isaiah laid out that were sometimes, like, had a similar idea. And it's tough to, was that Isaiah 33 or was that chapter 34? But again, as Judith said, these were not chapters and verses originally. These were a collection of prophecies that were woven together. And in some cases, again, when Christian scholars looked at it and said, hey, that's the end of that chapter, sometimes it was because it really was the end of the chapter or the end of that idea. And sometimes they just, well, that chapter's too long. We got to end that chapter. And they didn't quite end yet. The idea didn't end. Isaiah clearly didn't write his ideas to say, hey, that's the end of an idea. It's only 40 lines and we're done. Some of his chapters are 6 verses. So, but some of them were probably more like 50 verses or 60 verses. So sometimes the chapters don't exactly line up. But this is definitely, again, we're back into the bad stuff, which is,
Yeah, it felt so good back then.
don't worry, it'll get better.
They read the road
Yeah.
and the way it's as if it came right from Isaiah. Have you read it?
Yeah, but I haven't read it. I haven't read it like you have while you're reading Isaiah at the same time. So
the picture was so clear. I've never seen it so clear before.
that it's biblical. Yeah, I'll something. I don't know that I want to go back and read it. It's a really hard book to read. It's a very good book. Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which I told you was turned into a movie. Viggo Mortensen plays the man, and about 10, 15 years ago. It's not a bad, it's such a depressing book, but it's all his books are depressing, but this one was a pretty good movie. No one saw it. No one saw The Road. I'm not making this up. Now I'm starting to wonder whether I made it up. This Viggo Mortensen started it. Look it up. I'm sure. I know. I couldn't have made it up. All right. I couldn't have made that up. Rosemary, did you see it?
No,
No?
Maybe I did make it up. No,
I've been
I'm sure.
behind on movies.
This one, it didn't get a lot of, I don't think it got a lot of buzz, but look, Cormac McCarthy wrote No Country for Old Men. So that movie won an Academy. The Coen brothers finally won an Oscar with that one. What does it say?
Is it a sci-fi movie?
No, it might be listed only because it's a post-apocalyptic. It's post-apocalyptic.
John Hillcoat? No, that's not it then, right? These are all about apocalyptic survival.
Yes, that's it.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't. What year did it come out?
2009, The Road.
2010, so 29, yeah.
Yeah, 29.
Yeah.
And it says, America is a grim gray shadow of itself. After catastrophe, a man and his young son wander through the post-apocalyptic world, trying to keep their dream of civilization alive. The journey toward the sea, surviving as best they can on what they can gather.
Yeah, that's it. Like I said, it's a real uplifting story, but it is very apocalyptic and it's very Isaiah-like. And I think, yeah, and of course it takes place in America. So there you go. But look, there's so much of that now. My daughter, Dina, was just watching The Last of Us. And I said, I said, I can't,
Started it and
I can't. I'm like, I told
couldn't
Dina,
either.
I said, Dina, I said, I've had my fill of zombie apocalyptic stuff. I really have. And and I've never watched, I don't know if, and I never watched Walking Dead, but it's like, I have enough of that. Like I've thought about it. I've seen it. I saw the Cormac McCarthy, I read the book. But I don't know. I don't have any more. I can't absorb anymore. Give me something different. By the way, I really like, if you want to watch something that's a little fun and also really well acted, on Apple TV, Shrinking with
Oh, yeah.
and it's really good because it's just about people and the crazy stuff that people do, and it's sad and it's funny and it's a good show. It's not the greatest, but it's good enough, and it's an entertainment. It's an entertainment, anyways. All
That's-
right,
It's fun.
it's fun, and it's and Harrison Ford is so good in it, man. Guy's everywhere now. Guy turns 80 years old and decides he wants to be in everything. He's amazing. Yeah, he's good in this too. All right, he's believable in this. Plus, he's got Parkinson's, and it's just, yeah, it's got a lot of stuff in it that I don't know. I always thought that Harrison Ford might be my father, but he's not. Anyway, no, he is a lot like him in this show. He's a lot like him. Anyways, no, a lot like him. It was a little too close to home. Yeah. Anyways, there you go. All right, let's continue.
For my sword shall be drunk in the sky. Lo, it shall come down upon Edom, upon the people I have doomed to wreak judgment. The Lord has a sword. It is sated with blood. It is gorged with fat, the blood of lambs and he-goats, the kidney fat of rams. For the Lord holds a sacrifice in Bozrah, a great slaughter in the land of Edom.
Yeah, God looks pretty violent in this. This is not a God that is no, this is a God that's wanting a little bit of blood. And that God is going to get this blood one way or the other. And yeah, this is against the Edomites, people who took advantage of the Assyrian conquest to run in and raid and also make trouble for us.
Wild oxen shall fall with them, young bulls with mighty steers, and their land shall be drunk with blood, their soil shall be saturated with fat. For it is the Lord's day of retribution, the year of vindication for Zion's cause. Its streams shall be turned to pitch, and its soil to sulfur. Its land shall become burning pitch. Night and day it shall never go out. Its smoke shall rise for all time. Through the ages it shall lie in ruins. Through the eons none shall traverse it. Jackdaws and owls shall possess it. Great owls and ravens shall dwell there. He shall measure it with a line of chaos and with weights of emptiness. It shall be called, no kingdom is there. Its nobles and its lords shall be nothing.
Yeah, so they're talking about Edom. They're talking about this area that's going to be ravaged. And we've seen this kind of imagery before. When the land, when it becomes a ghost town, you get, if you look at here, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. What does the King James say, Mary, for jackdaws and owls in verse 11? Yeah, the bitterns are back, those birds. So these are birds that they saw that would come around when people were gone. And if they're there, it's because people aren't there anymore. So these are This is what happens when a dome will become a ghost town.
Thorns shall grow up in its palaces, nettles and briars in its strongholds. It shall be a home of jackals, an abode of ostriches. Wildcats shall meet hyenas, goat demons shall greet each other. There too the Lilith shall repose and find herself a resting place.
Yeah, and there we get some demons and stuff like that again. We read this before. We said these are goat demons or seir are satyrs. What's the King James have for that? Yeah, they went with the satyr again. I mean, goat demons. Could be wild goats, but based on the proximity to this word right here, the Lilith, the night demons. It seems as though these are equally magical and scary things that you don't want to come across. So as we said, the idea that the devil has goat feet didn't come out of nowhere. These are the developments of those kinds of ideas. Lilith here is mentioned in this context. The name Lilith definitely is connected to the night. This is the first time that we've encountered this word in the Bible as a noun, as a power. And here, yeah, it's in verse 14. What's your translation say?
Wild beasts shall meet with hyenas, and satyrs shall cry to his fellow, yea, there shall be night hag
Yeah,
light.
there's your night hag. What does the King James have for Lilith? For Lilith? Wow, look at that. King James took it all out.
Is this Lilith of Lilith?
Yeah, this is the Lilith. And here it seems to be that she has a place where she can find rest. Manuach definitely means that's a resting place. That's where she goes to relax. That's her spa day. Your town becomes her spa day. That's not a good thing. If Lilith likes your town and is living in your town, you're probably not living there anymore. No one's living there anymore. It's a place where demons live. It's a ghost town. We call it a ghost town for a reason. There's ghosts there. So these are ghosts and things you don't want to see. You don't want to see Lilith. So Lilith here is, without question, not a good thing. Now, the Midrash on Lilith, where Lilith was originally Adam's first wife, is an explanation for how Lilith was created or why she was created. The thought is, and I believe that this is the case, we can never prove it, but based on what you see in the Lilith Midrash, the Midrash exists because everyone believed in Lilith demons. Everyone did. So that was normal. Believing in Lilith was normal. Everyone believed in it. So the rabbi said, we're not going to win this one. We're not going to get people to stop believing in Lilith. Everyone believes in Lilith. They believed in Lilith. Maybe some of them didn't, but they were like, what's the purpose of fighting this? We are not going to win this. So let's explain it. Let's give a Jewish explanation for who Lilith is. And so they did, which is that they said that she was Adam's first wife and she was cast out because she demanded to be treated equally. Right? So why does this exist, by the way? So let's just mention this.
So why is it a capital L?
Because they didn't. Why does yours say night hag? Why does that one say screech owls? Because they don't want to deal with what really happens here, which is that this is Lilith. This is the Lilith. There should be 100% a capital L. Is Glory, do you have a Bible there with you? Is Glory on?
No, she's not. She's not on. I'll tell her to get her. I'll tell her to get her.
No, that's okay. I was interested to see what her Bible translation was for Lilith. Look, a lot of people don't want to deal with this because it raises up this idea that there are words in the Bible that, here, let me just, yeah, the NIV just says night creatures, which is Lilith. I mean, she's a night creature. The word Lila is night. I mean, her name is definitely associated with night. Let me just see so that's what the NIV says. The New Revised Standard Version says, is, let's see. The New Revised says, let me just put it. Yeah.
She's the primordial.
Yeah, well, she is the,
Isn't it interesting?
okay, here we go. Yeah.
So that the woman is the wrong, is the evil, is the night owl, the screech owl, the whatever.
Well, there's a question of like, are they even going to bother with it, right? So here's,
Well, she does not like being confined to evil.
okay, well, that's your, yes. So okay, so let's get to that. I do want to point out that that is why I love the New Revised Standard Version. This is exactly why I love them. Because somebody there actually had the courage to translate it the way it should be, which is with a capital L. That's why I like it. I didn't know for sure it'd be there, but this is the way it should be treated. I mean, this is the way it should be translated. Wild cats meeting hyenas, goat demons shall call to each other. So this is what the tone of it was. This is what the meaning of it was. And there also Lilith shall repose and find a place to rest. No, it isn't. That's why it's a capital L. So that's why it should be. That the fact that they didn't translate it like that anywhere else is because they didn't want to deal with it. They didn't want to put it in there because it shows that even during the biblical period, she was known. And the reason that it's stupid to not do this is because the Hebrew here is clearly a singular, and it's a singular female. The word there isn't night demons. That makes no sense. So don't translate it as night demons or night creatures. There's not a plural. It's one person, and that one person is La. She has a resting place. So the reason that the Midrash existed, it's a perfect, I love the Lilith Midrash for a few reasons. First of all, it's a perfect example of the agenda. What's the agenda? To put women in their place. To teach women, you're not supposed to get out of line. You don't want to be like Lilith. You don't want to be a night demon. Now, where does that come from? From this. There's a textual problem. There's a textual problem that the rabbis had to answer. It's a huge problem. Genesis chapter 1 says men and women were created together. Genesis chapter 2 says that Eve was created out of the rib of Adam. There's two different stories. We know it. We can say that it's two different versions of the story. They couldn't say that. So the rabbis had to answer it. And they did. They answered it by telling us that there was a first woman. Her name was Lilith. She was created as Adam's exact opposite, with the same power and strength that Adam had. And she got out of line. She said to God, I'm equal to Adam. I don't want to be subservient to him. We were created together. And God says, essentially, and I don't, look, there's so much there that I like, it's a wonderful story, but it's because it tells you so much about what's going on, is that God goes, I made a mistake. I got to start over. And he throws out Lilith. He throws her out, and she becomes the night demon, right? She becomes the scariest thing in the world, the night demon. She kills babies in the night. She kills babies. It's very scary. When a baby died, what happened? Lilith took it. So people would tie a little red ribbon around the crib to make sure Lilith couldn't get into the crib. That's where it came from, my friends. Lilith would get your baby. Lilith.
We messed up at the beginning.
So what happened is the rabbis had to answer that textual problem. They also taught a lesson from it. They also created a story wrapped around a legend that everyone already believed. So people would come to them and go, "Hey, Rabbi, where's Lilith come from?" Well, let me tell you where Lilith came from. So it achieved every one of those goals. This is why it's a perfect midrash, because it takes a textual problem, teaches a lesson, and incorporates the popular culture of the time. It uses the trope and it uses the mythology and it uses everything that people are already talking about. So that's why the midrash is so good. It's got all those, it hits those three things: the textual problem, the lesson that you want to teach people, and how do we wrap it around something that also people already are liking. Because they can have two or three, they can have two out of those three, right? You can have two out of the three. You can have a textual problem. By the way, we don't care about the textual problems anymore, which is one of the reasons why midrash isn't as powerful anymore, because we're not looking to do that. If I say the Bible is written by, if I say those are written by two different people, I don't have a problem with it. I don't need you to give me an answer, right? I don't need you to tell me how these two stories can both be. I don't have that problem. The other two, though, we can still have, which is how do we wrap this around something that's going to teach us a lesson, and how is it going to incorporate the things that we think about today, the mythology of today.
So how does the midrash of Eve with the serpent, what story comes out of that?
Oh, well, then there's other stuff that comes out of that, which is that's the devil, which you start to get even in the midrash. Definitely get it in Christianity, but you have a whole bunch of stuff that comes out of that. But at least in that story, Eve was preyed upon by Satan, or the liar. She was the weaker one, but the argument there, Marcia, is that she already was the weaker one. So the fact that she did that, you could say, hey, that's God, you made her like that, and which is essentially what Adam says. But with the Lilith story, what's funny about that is that Lilith essentially wouldn't have fallen for that, because Lilith is too smart. So she gets thrown out because she's going to be a problem for Adam if she's there, which is that we're not going to, how can you have equality? So the rabbi's answer is you don't. You send her away and you make women subservient to men so that there isn't this kind of chaos. Because the alternative, which is we have to figure out a way to allow women to have an equal say, they don't want to wrap their heads around that. Well, in all fairness, by the way, it's not like they were alone.
Right.
How many women Caesars were there? How many women kings of Persia were there? Queens. So it wasn't like they were living in a world that was patriarchal and that had a hierarchy. So it wasn't their issue, it was everyone's issue. So the answer of how to come to terms with it, that's why, by the way, Lilith demon, the other thing she would do, she would gather up man's spilled seed in the night. Every time a man spilled a seed, she would gather that up and she would create more demons out of it. That was why men were supposed to also be very wary of Lilith and of fantasies at night, because Lilith would take advantage of you and do that. So, there's a little cautionary tale for men there too, which is you got to be careful with your sexuality, because the Lilith demon will create more demons out of. That's how she breeds with your seed. A lot of stuff there. A lot of stuff there. Yeah.
Piece of the day.
Yeah.
I just learned yesterday from Paul the midwife, my source of all that, is that homosexuality was illegal for men, but not for women. And the reason I've been thinking about that is that women didn't matter.
Yeah. It wasn't enforceable. It wasn't enforceable. It wasn't enforceable. How are you going to even enforce that? I mean, assumedly, the sad thing is that assumedly, what probably would have happened is if a woman was caught having an illicit homosexual relationship, she would have been beaten, but there was no law against it. So
Because she didn't marry.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have registered so, yeah, it didn't matter. But Lilith did, and as you can see, the translations all tried to get rid of her. As we've pointed out before, when we always, the Lilith gets the last word. When Jewish feminists in the 70s decided that they wanted to give a voice to feminist midrash and feminist stories and feminist outlooks on Jewish life, they created a magazine, quarterly magazine called Lilith, and they named it after Lilith, which I used to get, but I don't get any magazines anymore. I don't get anything. So seriously, I don't even know what Lilith is publishing right now, but it was a great magazine. It was a great
Really?
magazine for,
Quarterly, same magazine, comes out.
comes out online though, right?
Yeah.
So Lilith, I remember reading Lilith as a kid, because my mom had it. And so we had different teachings and different approaches towards women telling these stories, which was important. And now it's almost a foregone conclusion, is now the majority of rabbis that are being ordained are women. So it's almost, I want to say it's unnecessary, but women are writing and teaching those stories now anyway. So it's kind of, it's been done. I mean, it's done. Yeah, in some places, in many places, but for the Reform and conservative world, that's the future. So the voices are not marginalized anymore within that community, within those communities. And the communities that need it are not going to read Lilith anyways. But it'll have an effect, trust me. So that's Lilith. There too, where Lilith is in the ghost towns. But it shows you what people thought about in those days. Interesting, an interesting idea. And scared of the feminine, the power of the feminine too. I mean, that was obviously part of the issue there was, what does it mean? Oh, we're not done, by the way, with the scary stuff. There's more scary stuff.
There the arrow snake shall nest and lay eggs, and shall brood and hatch in its shade. There too the buzzards shall gather with one another. Search and read it in the scroll of the Lord. Not one of these shall be absent. Not one shall miss its fellow. For his mouth has spoken. It is his spirit that has assembled them. And it is he who apportioned it to them by lot, whose hand divided it for them with a line. They shall possess it for all time. They shall dwell there through the ages.
Yeah, and so all those prophecies against the Edomites is not good, and it did. I mean, it did happen. So Edom did become a wasteland, and it was for many years, and actually still much of Jordan is a wasteland. It did happen, but yeah, this was a punishment that's going to come from them for them. I'm not sure again that end of chapter 34 was the end of the idea. Let's keep going.
The arid desert shall be glad. The wilderness shall rejoice and shall blossom like a rose. It shall blossom abundantly. It shall also exult and shout. It shall receive the glory of Lebanon, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They shall behold the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God.
So it seems like this is where it gets better, which normally comes at the end of the prophecy. So it seems like, again, 34 and 35 are this right here is kind of like still the idea from the previous one of this desert area that's Edom coming back to life. And it'll even be like the places that we read about before, which again, we just read about these places, Lebanon, Carmel, and Sharon.
Strengthen the hands that are slack. Make firm the tottering knees. Say to the anxious of heart, be strong, fear not. Behold your God. Requital is coming, the recompense of God. He himself is coming to give you triumph.
Yeah, and this phrase, al tiru or al tira, don't be afraid, be strong, fear not. This is a phrase that we get a lot in Isaiah, and we get it a lot in the second Isaiah too. Al tira, you'll see this a lot. Don't be afraid. Here, Chizku, be strong too, is here with it too. So we do get that a lot.
Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer. The tongue of the dumb shall shout aloud, for waters shall burst forth in the desert, streams in the wilderness. Torrid earth shall become a pool, parched land, fountains of water. The home of jackals, a pasture, the abode of ostriches, reeds and rushes. And a highway shall appear there, which shall be called the sacred way. No one unclean shall pass along it, but it shall be for them. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray.
So this is, again, what's going to happen when God fixes everything. Areas that are desolate, which again are areas where there are going to be jackals and ostriches, those are going to be areas that are going to come back to life. And again, there's going to be a road, and we're going to call it Derech HaKodesh, the sacred way. It's going to take people from place to place. Yep.
No lion shall be there, no ferocious beast shall set foot on it. These shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk it. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come with shouting to Zion, crowned with joy everlasting. They shall attain joy and gladness, while sorrow and sighing flee.
Yeah. And so what you see in these two prophecies, 34 and 35, is the rebirth of parts of Judah, which were being destroyed by the Edomites, because the Edomites lived in Jordan, would come across the area around the Dead Sea, and they would raid it. If Judah was weak, they would come in and raid it. And then it was very much like the Negev, just on one side and the other. I mean, you don't really notice much difference between the two. And for those of us that are going to be going to Jordan in June, or we're there in February, there isn't really a whole big difference between one side of the desert and the other. Whether you're in Masada on the Jewish side, on the Israel side, the Judean side in those days, or whether you're in, the Wadi Rum desert on the other side, it's going to be pretty desolate. But there were times when there was water. There were times when people could cultivate the areas and build them up again and create livable areas. And then there are other areas where, like that, if the people are gone and if there's nobody taking care of the waters and the reservoirs and all that other stuff, the area becomes a ghost town. And that's what happens. Like, you drive through, we have the one on the way to Vega. We have Calico you can stop at off the 15 or whatever, or wherever it is. And you can see what happens in an area where you're in the desert and the desert reclaims it. So now we're going to finish today with this last part of Isaiah, these last couple of chapters, which is the story that we read in Kings, virtually the same story. We'll take a look at it again, for those people who were with us a few weeks ago or months ago when we read the story in Kings. This is the narrative. So this is not typical in the prophets where we get a narrative. It's also not typical where they literally are quoting the exact same text. So which came first? There are differences of opinion on it. Is the Isaiah text older or the King's text older? Most people say the King's text is older and the Isaiah text is a version of that. The Dead Sea Scrolls shed a little bit of light on it, other than the fact that, again, doesn't really answer the question. There's still debate over which one's earlier, even reading the Dead Sea Scrolls. But the Isaiah scroll is an older version of a scroll. So maybe, again, what you could say is maybe finding the Dead Sea Scrolls really confirms that it's the older version, that Kings is the older version, because the Isaiah scroll really didn't make it so that the Isaiah scroll the Isaiah version would be the older version. There are differences in little things, like sometimes Hezekiah in Kings is called Hezekiah, which is the shorter version, whereas in here it says Hizkiyahu, which is the full version of his name, Hezekiah. So there are little differences of the way it's written. What's also interesting is the way Hezekiah is depicted and the way Isaiah is depicted in the two stories, because Isaiah is mentioned in the other story. So he's mentioned in the king's version. He's there. And in here, he's there too, but now this is ostensibly his story. So, most likely the writer of Isaiah or the editor of Isaiah wanted you to see the story of Isaiah play out in his text, right? So the theory is that the editor of Isaiah said, there's a story well, I don't know if he said it's in Kings, but he says there's another version of this. There's a version of Isaiah doing prophecy in this book. Let's put it here. Let's put it in Isaiah's book, so that if anyone reads Isaiah's story in his book, they'll have that story. They'll actually have it. So that's probably what happened here. So let's take a look at it. And again, for those who were with us a few months ago, when you read it in Kings, this is the story. I will tell you right off the bat, this might be the wrong date. It may not be in the 14th year. You notice here it says Kings 18 through 20. And it says we'll put some footnotes where there's variance. But the issue of when it happened, it says in both places it's the 14th year of King Hezekiah. Probably actually happened around the 24th year of King Hezekiah. That this story actually happens a little later in story in Hezekiah's life. But that's not that important in that both versions of the story say in the 14th year. All right, so here's what happens. Let's read it.
In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, King Sennacherib of Assyria marched against all the fortified towns of Judah and seized them. From Lachish, the king of Assyria sent the Ravshekeh with a large force to King Hezekiah in Jerusalem. The Ravshekeh took up a position near the conduit of the upper pool by the road of the Fuller's Field. And Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the palace, Shebna the scribe, and Yoah, the son of Asaph, the recorder, went out to him.
Remember this story? Yes? No? Some people remember this story? This is the story of the king Hezekiah being warned by the Assyrians, you better surrender. Now, some people have said that they're being laid siege to. Not really. As I was reading one of the articles, he hasn't been laid siege to yet. His cities have been destroyed, but he's in Jerusalem. The Assyrian army isn't at Jerusalem yet. They're at Lachish. They destroyed Lachish. That's the one where I showed you the pictures of what the Assyrians did there. They massacred the Jews. Let me just show you real quick so that you remember. Make this graphic scene come back to life for you. This is the siege of Lachish. These are Jews being impaled on sticks naked in front of the king of Assyria while he's laying siege to Lachish. This is at the British Museum. This is these were excavated in Iraq. Bless you. So we found those, the Assyrian kings, bless you. And when we uncovered Nineveh, we found those and they tell the story. The story is on the wall and the pictures are there. And those are pictures of what he did to Lachish. So Lachish is about 20 miles away from Jerusalem. And so he sends his person, his Ravshekeh, which it says right here, is a title. It is one of a couple titles that we're going to see. The Ravshekeh literally probably meant something like the chief butler or his chief guy. It seems like he's not a military guy, so it seems like he's more of a diplomat. And what we know about this guy, we'll see in a second, is that he speaks fluent Hebrew, which freaks everybody out. To remind you, this is the scene where the guys speak in Hebrew and they tell them to stop speaking in Hebrew. All right, we'll get to that in a second, but this is what happens. They're not, so the army isn't there, but the delegation, the Assyrian delegation comes out to the area outside of the wall and starts talking to the guys. And here's what happens.
The Ravshakeh said to them, you tell Hezekiah, thus said the great king, the king of Assyria, what makes you so confident? I suppose mere talk makes counsel and valor for war. Look, on whom are you relying that you have rebelled against me? You are relying on Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff which enters and punctures the palm of anyone who leans on it. That's what Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is like to all who rely on him.
Remember this part? This is again, this issue of the kingdom of Judah was relying on Egypt having their backs against the Assyrians. Well, it hasn't worked so far because we just read the Assyrians have run through Judah and have conquered all these cities. Now, this is 10 years after the north has already been destroyed. The northern kingdom has already been destroyed by Assyrians, which, by the way, begs an interesting question. Does the Ravshakeh, does he know Hebrew because he's a Judite, or maybe because he's one of those guys that was taken from the north when the north got captured? He's an Israelite, maybe. The idea that some random dude in the Assyrian court speaks fluent Hebrew is not likely. It's much more likely that this guy's an Israelite. He's one of us. And the Assyrians have hired him to talk to us and to make the case for why you should surrender now. Don't make us lay siege to this town. That's what this is about. They're not being laid siege to yet in Jerusalem. The other cities have already fallen. And you think you're going to rely on Pharaoh, the Egyptians? Okay.
And if you tell me that you are relying on the Lord your God, he is the very one whose shrines and altars Hezekiah did away with, telling Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship only at this altar. Come now, make this wager with my master, the king of Assyria. I'll give you 2,000 horses if you can produce riders to mount them.
So this is a complete humiliation. You don't even have this army to go to war against us. I'll give them to you. I'll give you the horses. You don't even have the soldiers. This is a complete humiliation. And it's also humiliation of God, because he's saying you can't worship. The way Hezekiah has forced you all to worship in Jerusalem, that's not good either, which of course, if he's a northern Israelite, he doesn't like the idea that you only have to worship in Jerusalem. So everything that this guy is saying so far is digging under their skin. Everything he's saying is just a beautiful teardown of everything that the Judites are believing in. They believe in Egypt, they believe in Hezekiah, they believe in God. None of it. None of this is going to work for you. And he says, you don't even have the soldiers to fight against me.
So how could you refuse anything, even to the deputy of one of my master's lesser servants, relying on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? And do you think I have marched against this land to destroy it without the Lord? The Lord himself told me, go up against that land and destroy it.
Now that's crazy, because what this guy just said is that God's given him permission to do everything that he's going to do, which is further like a bigger problem, because that's what God does. I mean, Isaiah has been telling everybody this. So he's literally telling you, what are you talking about? God's given me permission. Your God has given me permission. It's already done. Now, how do they know that isn't what happened? How do they know that? Guess what? That's what the Babylonians did. And it's pretty clear that God gave, we believe that King Nebuchadnezzar was given permission by God to destroy the temple. God must have given him permission. So he's just saying this is the Assyrians. He's only doing it 100 years earlier. No reason, based on what we've seen from what Isaiah says and what maybe other prophets said. Yeah, maybe he did. Maybe King Sennacherib was told, yeah, go up and destroy Jerusalem. All right, so this is what these guys have heard, these representatives.
Eliakim, Shevna, and Yoah replied to the Rav Shekah, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, since we understand it. Do not speak to us in Judean in the hearing of the people on the wall.
Yeah, so stop speaking in Hebrew. They all can hear it. The soldiers all understand Hebrew. They don't understand Aramaic, which also indicates that they didn't, at least at this point, speak Aramaic on a daily basis. They will later. Jews will eventually speak Aramaic. By the time of Jesus, we know they're speaking Aramaic in Israel. They're not speaking Hebrew, which means that people who understood Hebrew didn't necessarily understand Aramaic. It's an important idea. Aramaic's kind of an in-between language, a little bit between Hebrew and Arabic. It's kind of a language that comes from that in-between place. We do. We have the Kaddish is in Aramaic, the Talmud is in Aramaic. It's close enough that, you know, we're assumed that we could read it, but it's a little different.
Kol
So,
Nidre, isn't that one also Aramaic?
Gray is in Aramaic. The Zohar is in Aramaic.
Haggadah is also.
Haggadah is in Aramaic. Halach ma'anya, Chad Gad Yah. The parts of the Haggadah that you know, a lot of them, not the whole Haggadah, but the long.
The Kaddish is Aramaic, right?
The Kaddish is Aramaic. That's right. All right. So we know
But
more.
the Rav Shekah replied, was it to your master and to you that my master sent me to speak those words? It was precisely to the men who are sitting on the wall, who will have to eat their dung and drink their urine with you.
Yeah, so that's a perfect line. I mean, this guy is a genius because he has a response for everything. And he's saying, yeah, I'm going to speak in Hebrew because that's who I'm here to tell. The soldier, the everyday man and woman who's going to have to be part of this siege because you guys think you can fight against us. So this guy does his job, man. He's totally getting under his skin. This is the best propaganda you could ever have. And they're saying, just stop it. Don't speak in Hebrew. No, I'm here to talk to those people. I'm not here to tell you. I'm here to tell them. Because the idea was you turn the population against the king. And therefore, what would happen? The people would assassinate the king. If he said, I want to stand up to the Assyrians, they go, no way, we're going to kill you and we're going to give in to the Assyrians. So here's
And the Rav Shekah stood and called out in a loud voice in Judean, hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus said the king, don't let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to save you. Don't let Hezekiah make you rely on the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely save us. This city will not fall into the hands of Assyria. Don't listen to Hezekiah, for thus said the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come out to me, so that you may all eat from your vines and your fig trees and drink water from your cisterns, until I come and take you away to a land like your own, a land of bread and wine, of grain fields and vineyards.
Now, this is a crazy line because there he just told him, I'm going to take you away. I'm going to exile you, but it'll be an okay place. Don't worry about it. It'll be just like this place. I'm going to exile you. But he also tells him, but you know what? I'll wait a little bit. We're not going to take you right away. We're going to let you eat from your vine trees and fig trees for a while, and then we'll take you, and then we'll take you away. You're going to be exiled, but we'll give you a little bit of time, and we'll take you to a really nice place. Because the alternative is we're going to kill you. That's what these people were just told. The choice is between either being exiled and being able to go, not right away, or you get killed. Those are their choices. Those are your choices. He's told them, though, you're going to get exiled.
Beware of letting Hezekiah mislead you by saying, the Lord will save us. Did any of the gods of the other nations save his land from the king of Assyria? Where were the gods of Hamat and Arpad? Where were the gods of Sepharvaim? And did they save Samaria from me?
Yeah, and notice what it says here. And did the gods of Samaria save them from me? Samaria is northern Israel. That's the kingdom of Israel. And there they're saying their gods, which is really, of course, your God, didn't save them from you. So it should be, again, did any of these other places, were their gods able to withstand it? And what he's essentially saying, however you understand northern Israel, however you understand Shomron, that's people who came out of Egypt with you. Those are Israelites. Those are people who speak Hebrew. Those are people who had prophets. Those are people who up until a couple hundred years ago, sometimes you fought with those people, but there were also people that you went back and forth. Those are the northern tribes. And God didn't spare them. You're going to wind up like Samaria. You're going to wind up with like the other people, other Israelites.
Which among all the gods of those countries saved their countries from me, that the Lord should save Jerusalem from me? But they were silent and did not answer him with a single word, for the king's order was, do not answer him.
So they did what their king told them to do. Hezekiah said, don't say a word. So did they not say a word because they were upset, because they were sad, because they were, they were just blown over? I mean, what happened? Well, the king told them not to say anything. Don't say anything. Just walk away. You can make the argument, what's there to say? There's nothing for them to say. He came out, heard the words, and that's it.
And so Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the palace, Shebna the scribe, and Yoah, son of Asaph the recorder, came to Hezekiah with their clothes rent, and they reported to him what the Rav Shekah had said.
Now, no matter what, they weren't happy about it. We know that they didn't just go back and say, this is what the guy said. They rent their clothes. They were upset. They were mourning. They were sad. This is not good. They're not happy about it. Are they not happy about it because he scared them? Because he's blasphemed against God? I mean, who knows? I mean, whatever it is, it's not a good moment right now. They're not feeling strong. Let's put it that way. Now we're going to start to see Isaiah.
When King Hezekiah heard this, he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. He also sent Eliakim, who was in charge of the palace, Shebna the scribe, and the senior priests, covered with sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz.
And here is why we have this text, because Isaiah is going to get involved. So Hezekiah wants him to do something. He's getting Isaiah involved in this. He didn't go himself, but he sent his people. The same people that he sent out to talk to the Rav Shekah. It's not like they're just random people. These are the guys who know what's going on. They're his trusted advisors. And here's what happens.
They said to him, thus said Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress, of chastisement, and of disgrace. The babes have reached the birth stool, but the strength to give birth is lacking. Perhaps the Lord your God will take note of the words of the Rav Shekah, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to blaspheme the living God, and will mete out judgment for the words that the Lord your God has heard, if you will offer a prayer for the surviving remnant.
Wow. So the message that they bring Isaiah is maybe God will respond to what we just heard. Maybe God's going to respond to the fact that
God initiated.
Well, we don't know that God initiated the Assyrians. They said it, but we have no evidence. Yeah, we don't know it's true. So and so maybe what they're saying is well, if God has sanctioned this, maybe because of what we've done, maybe the fact that this guy is being blasphemous, we can get God upset at him. And that's what they're basically asking Isaiah to do. Do something, intervene, get God to do something, because maybe the fact that he blasphemed God, that this is going to be, he'll get punished for it. So here's what happens.
When King Hezekiah's ministers came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, tell your master as follows, thus said the Lord, do not be frightened by the words of blasphemy against me that you have heard from the minions of the king of Assyria.
Yeah, and everyone now thinks of the little yellow guys now when you say the word minions, but it's not it's basically putting them down though. It's saying these are just This is
Because you read it on the internet doesn't mean it's true.
what, yes, it's true. And he uses that same phrase, right? Al tira, don't be frightened, don't be scared. Just because this guy comes here and he does say he's blasphemed against me. It's what God's saying. This is what God says. God says, don't be afraid. This is an Isaiah saying.
I will delude him.
No,
He
he's,
will hear
he's
a
speaking as a
rumor and
prophet.
return to his land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his land.
Okay, so he says, I will delude him, which is interesting because look at this phrase, I will put a spirit in him. This is a little different than what it said earlier in Kings. But one of the interesting things is I will put a ruach, I will put a spirit in him. What does this sound like? Somebody? Anybody? I'll give you a clue. It's another king. I'll give
Oh,
you,
Saul.
yeah. This is what happens to Saul. And this is why they translated it as delude him. What is I guarantee you it doesn't say delude him in the King James, Mary. What does it say? A blast upon him. That's pretty well. What is Reverend Lynn, what does your translation say?
I will put a spirit in him.
Yeah, putting a spirit in him is a much more of the literal translation, which again, the effect might be delude him, but I'm gonna put bad energy in the guy, right? I'm gonna make him feel like King Saul did, which is crazy, a little crazy. I'm gonna make him a little nuts. He will hear a rumor in his land and return. Okay, and then he's gonna die back home, which is of course what happens. But there's like two versions of this story. You'll see.
The Rashekah, meanwhile, heard that the king had left Lachish. He turned back and found the king of Assyria attacking Livnah. But the king of Assyria learned that King Tirhakah of Nubia had come out to fight him. And when he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah saying, "Tell this to King Hezekiah of Judah. Do not let your God, on whom you are relying, mislead you into thinking that Jerusalem will not be delivered into the hands of the king of Assyria. You yourself have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, how they have annihilated them. And can you escape? For the nations that my predecessors destroyed, Gazan, Haran, Rezeph, and the Bethedanites in Telassar, saved by their gods? Where is the king of Hamat and the king of Arpad and the kings of Lair, Sepharvaim, Hena, and Eva?"
Yeah, these are kingdoms up in the north, in Syria and in Assyria, in the Mesopotamian area, all the way out. What happened to all those places? Again, don't think that you're going to be spared. Those weren't spared. So he's sending a message to him that you don't think you're going to be able to get away with this. But here's a second version of the story, which is it's not just that there's rumors going on in his own kingdom, but that he's also now being attacked by a king of Nubia. Now, this is a weird story, and we really don't know what's going on here. Because the king of Nubia, my friends, would have been black. I mean, he's not like Egyptian. Like normally when we talk, well, were the pharaohs black or, how dark were they? People get, yeah, it's pretty clear that this area that has just been mentioned, that King Tirhakah was the kingdom of Cush, Melech Cush. So this is south of Egypt. This is an area which in Hebrew today, a Cushite is literally a black person. This is a black person. This is a black king. So this black king, however you want to understand it, is the hero of this story. He's the hero of this story or a hero of this story, because he's part of what makes King Sennacherib go nuts, is that there's a king of the south. Now that's below Egypt. So Egypt was supposed to fight on our side, and now there's a king from Nubia or Cush that's now fighting on our side, Ethiopia. What's that about? Where'd that guy come from? It's pretty wild. And we don't know much about what's really happening here because it's so strange. It's so far away that, what did the Egyptians maybe hire the guy to come up and fight against him? Maybe this is the way the Egyptians decided to go to war against Assyria, hire somebody else to go to war against them. It's possible. That's what it says. So
Wasn't there a time when the pharaohs of Egypt were black? They came from Nubia?
we don't know. We don't know if it's during this time, right? So we don't
Right.
know. But this guy is clearly from Nubia or from Cush. He's clearly from below Egypt. That's without a doubt. Whether he's from Sudan or whether he's from Ethiopia, he is from probably a very dark-skinned guy.
Yeah.
The guy who's the hero of this story. Interesting, right? Not what you'd expect.
So I have a question, Mark.
Yeah.
In our world, the fact that he was black has significance beyond just the context of the story.
Yep.
I'm wondering if that was true of the writers of the story.
I don't think so. And that's why they don't really delve into the fact that what his skin color is. But the weird thing is this story is so like mythical and so like, where did this even come from? And we really don't learn about this fight, right? It's not really clear where did this guy come from? Where did this battle take place? All of this kind of stuff is kind of like not really explained. And is this part of this whole collapse of how the Assyrians kind of just ran out of steam? I don't know, but it doesn't really make sense. But it's thrown out there. I mean, you just read it. It's in the Bible. So I don't know. But yes, I don't think it was an issue for the writers of the Bible because they didn't care about skin. They really didn't write about skin color. They didn't talk about it. We don't know how dark people were because it was not their agenda. They didn't care. All right. So here's Hezekiah. Here's Hezekiah's response. This is what we're going to finish with today. This is what Hezekiah does.
Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and read it. Hezekiah then went up to the house of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, O Lord of hosts, enthroned on the cherubim, you alone are God of all the kingdoms of the earth. You made the heavens and the earth.
And by the way, that is an interesting and important line because it means that by the 7th, 8th century BCE, the king of Judah says, God, you alone are the king of everything. So anybody who says, well, what do they believe? Do they believe in their God or do they believe in other gods? The other gods were there, but they just weren't important. He says, God, you are the only God of everything. There's no other God but you. That's what it says. Atahu Elohim. You're the only one. So he doesn't believe in other gods. He doesn't believe in a other force. He says it's just you, God. And here's what he says.
O Lord, incline your ear and hear, open your eye and see, hear all the words that Sennacherib has sent to blaspheme the living God. True, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have annihilated all the nations and their lands and have committed their gods to the flames and have destroyed them, for they are not gods, but man's handiwork of wood and stone.
So he says to God, look, all the other gods, yeah, they got destroyed because they're not gods. They're not real. You're God. You are real. You can't be destroyed.
But now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hands, and let all the kingdoms of the earth know that you, O Lord, alone are God.
And again, that is, they added this little bit here that is in the version in Kings, which is you alone are God.
Is this when that statement? That
It's pretty clear that it's at least by this point, we don't know if David had a relationship with God and just thought his God was the best God and his God was the God of Israel. But here it's, you are the only God. There is no other God. And here it is, a guy saying it. And this guy is a real guy. I mean, well, so we don't know that for sure that David's not a real guy, but there are people who say, well, we don't know really. No, we have no proof. Hezekiah, we have proof that he existed. He's mentioned in the Assyrian records as King Hezekiah, the same guy at the same time, carbon dated, blah, blah. It's all done. And now we know for a fact this guy said this. Now the Assyrians didn't write this down because they didn't believe in God. But there's no reason to believe that this was not real and it wasn't written at the time. So if you want a verifiable moment where we know that this happened, it's here.
And time.
700, almost within 5 years of the year 700. So 2,700 years ago, 2,700 years ago. At this time, there's probably 10,000 people, well, maybe a little bit more living in Jerusalem. Why? Because all the northern exiles, all the people or the northern survivors from the kingdom of the north probably came down to Jerusalem. We know that because Jerusalem expanded a little bit during this time. And so the city got bigger from northern survivors. The city got bigger. Rome is probably about half as big. Rome is a town at this point. The cities in Greece are for the most part, Athens is a town. Mycenae is a city in Greece. Mycenae and Knossos in Crete. Those are cities. Those are big Greek cities. There are no not only that, there are no cities in Europe that are bigger than 5,000 or 10,000 people. There is not one city that's bigger than Jerusalem at this point in Europe. Cities in China, obviously the cities like in Egypt, Memphis, that city, not Memphis, Tennessee, but Memphis, Egypt.
Elvis was big.
Elvis was getting big there, at least in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Memphis, Egypt had about probably 50,000 people, but there are cities in China that probably had 50,000 people plus. But Jerusalem is a city, but not, the biggest city, but it's a big enough city that people are living in buildings and there's walls and things like that. There's no wall around Rome at this point. There's no wall around Athens at this point. There's a wall around Jerusalem. But there are big cities. There are a couple of cities that are Greek that are big by this point, but they're not cities that will be big 300 years later. Babylon was big at this point. His town, Nineveh, was huge, was the biggest, probably one of the biggest cities of the world at the time. Yeah, but not Rome, not Athens, not any of those places. Yep. So here's what Isaiah says after this beautiful prayer we'll finish with this. This is what Isaiah says to Hezekiah. So Hezekiah knows. Hezekiah probably wasn't there, but God knows. God heard your prayer. Here's what Isaiah says.
Then Isaiah, son of Amoz, sent this message to Hezekiah. Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, to whom you have prayed, concerning King Sennacherib of Assyria. This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. Fair maiden Zion despises you. She mocks at you. Fair Jerusalem shakes her head at you. Whom have you blasphemed and reviled? Against whom made loud your voice and haughtily raised your eyes? Against the Holy One of Israel. Through your servants you have blasphemed my Lord, because you thought, thanks to my vast chariotry, it is I who have climbed the highest mountains, to the remotest parts of the Lebanon, and have cut down its loftiest cedars, its choicest cypresses, and have reached its highest peak, its densest forest. It is I who have drawn and drunk water. I have dried up with the soles of my feet all the streams of Egypt. Have you not heard? Of old, I planned that very thing. I designed it long ago and now have fulfilled it, and it has come to pass, laying fortified towns waste in desolate heaps.
So God has said so far to the Assyrians, yeah, everything you've done so far, it's all part of my plan. It's true. I've planned it. Yep. You've laid all these towns to waste. That was part of the plan.
Their inhabitants are helpless, dismayed, and shamed. They were but grass of the field and green herbage, grass off of the roofs that is blasted before the east wind. I know your stayings and your goings and comings, and how you have raged against me. Because you have raged against me and your tumult has reached my ears, I will place my hook in your nose and my bit between your jaws, and I will make you go back by the road by which you came.
That is a great line.
Mm.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
and the horse that brung you.
Yeah.
And this is the sign for you. This year you eat what grows of itself, and the next year what springs from that. And in the third year sow and reap and plant vineyards and eat their fruit. And the survivors of the house of Judah that have escaped shall renew its trunk below and produce boughs above. For a remnant shall come forth from Jerusalem, survivors from Mount Zion. The zeal of the Lord of hosts shall bring this to pass.
Yeah, that's well, let's read this. Oh, wait, before we read the last part, which is the Assyrian, what's going to happen to you, Assyrians? Zion will be saved. It looked pretty bad. It looked like they were going to be destroyed, but they're not going to be destroyed. They are going to survive. And yeah. Now, what's great about this is that there's hope. You know, that it's going to be okay. The remnant will survive and they will come back. They will build back. They'll be okay. The problem is Jews believe this forever. And it didn't always happen. During the Roman era, it didn't happen. So let's just finish with this last part about what's going to happen to you, King.
Assuredly, thus said the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not enter this city. He shall not shoot an arrow at it or advance upon it with a shield or pile up a siege mound against it. He shall go back by the way he came. He shall not enter this city, declares the Lord. I will protect and save this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David.
Yeah, so that's a great message. He's not going to do anything to you. Now, here's the weird part. We read that there was a king of Nubia, or king of a black king that got involved. That the Assyrians are going to hear that there's rumors of war that are going to happen. But now this is the third thing, and this is what we finish with.
That night, an angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. And the following morning, they were all dead corpses.
What? The angel of death, that angel of death that we get to invite back at Passover. Now, you just said, did I just say you get to invite him back? Yeah, I did. I did say we invite him back because we read about him at Passover, because that first Passover, he passed over our homes. That's why we call it Passover, because the angel of death passed over. Well, it seems as that the angel just went on a killing spree again. The angel of death just went out and killed 185,000 Assyrians in their camp. And we do, and yes. Well, I will tell you that he does come back at Passover, every year at Passover. And we hope he passes over our house again, and that he goes attacks our enemies again. Because Passover was also a time that said, if God's going to do one of those things, he's going to do it tonight. So if you want to know when the last of us happens at Passover. That's why the Jews decided to fight back against the Nazis in Warsaw Ghetto on Passover, 1943. They said this is going to be the night, one way or the other, the angel of death is going to pass by. So it's part of what happens is that Passover is a time of thinking about freedom, and in some cases, thinking about this kind of stuff happening, which is that God attacking our enemies, which is why we open up our doors when we welcome in Elijah. We say, come in, Elijah, the prophet. We all
So
know
King
that one.
Sennacherib,
Wait a second. We know
Okay.
that part. Rosemary, what part of the Haggadah do we not usually say out loud? It's that
we don't.
part that sits there in our Haggadah that we don't say. Shvo chamarcha. Judith, what does that part say? Shvo chamarcha. You remember? pour out your wrath, God.
Yeah, shvo chamaka, pour out your wrath against the our enemies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was an invocation of this.
But we don't say it out loud.
We don't say it out loud anymore. We don't.
Anymore. We used to.
We used to. So opening up the door for Elijah was one thing. Letting that power out was also something that people did. And we don't talk about it anymore because we don't live in a world where we're afraid. But for all the thousands of years that Jews were afraid, God would come back and do what he did on Passover that night and kill our enemies. Part of the Haggadah. Go look at it this year. I'm not saying to read it out. Now we've changed it. There's some Haggadahs that say, Shvok ahavtecha, God, pour out your love on those who love you and revere you. But the understanding is that those who hate you, God, you're going to go out and you're going to go on the rampage again. You're going to repeat what you did on that first night of Passover. So that's what happened when the angel of death came against them.
Does everyone not say shvoch anymore? Or
I've
just-
never been at a Seder where anyone said that out loud in English. And then again,
In English or in Aramaic?
they may have said in Aramaic and I didn't hear it. I have not heard it said out loud but I've had my own family Seders for a long time. And I don't think people have ever thought about it, even if they've said it out loud in English in front of me, I don't think they've thought about what they're actually doing. They're invoking this, the angel of death. Here's
Right.
what it says, the last words.
So King Sennacherib of Assyria broke camp and retreated and stayed in Nineveh. While he was worshiping in the temple of his god Nisroch, he was struck down with a sword by his sons Adramelech and Asarazar. They fled to the land of Ararat, and his son Esarhaddon succeeded him as king.
Yay! We're going to read the last two chapters next week. We didn't finish exactly all of this text, but yeah, we read this part in Kings. So interestingly, King Sennacherib gets killed by his own sons. Interesting. The death of the death of the firstborn. It's at least the death of your, it's the death of a father getting here, I'll just put this up here. Here, I'm just going to show you this. I'm just going to show you this before we go for Passover. Here's what the Jerusalem Post said. Pour out your wrath. Politically incorrect. One of the most controversial, and Jerusalem Post is pretty conservative paper. One of the most controversial passages in the Passover Haggadah for some Jews, and the most embarrassing, is the call for God to pour out your wrath on all the nations that do not acknowledge you and upon the kingdoms that do not call upon your name. Yeah. Should this portion of the Haggadah be omitted as the vestige of medieval malevolence on behalf of Jews toward non-Jews? Does this only reflect a reality of centuries ago when Jews were struggling with Jew haters? This guy writes about it. Oh yeah, he's saying we should use it to, yeah, he's saying don't give up on it. So he's, yeah. Yeah, anyway, so he's advocating that we continue to say it. But yeah, I mean, people don't know what to do with this. So let's just see if anybody else here says anything about it. Yeah, here's the version of it that's in my Haggadah, the one that I use. Pour out your fury against the nations, pour out your wrath against them. Now I will tell you that this Haggadah that I use also has a phrase that says, oh no, I'm not going to do this right now. It actually says pour out your love on the same page. So
Not Maxwell House?
no.
Well, God does do some embarrassing.
Yes.
And do we embrace those?
Well, again, we can give our own version of of this, which is the pour out your love part, which I'll show you in that same Haggadah, a different night. I'll show you the text that they use for that. Here's the, let me just see if I have pour out your love. No, this is not the right. That's the Haggadah I'm looking for. Okay, here it is.
There it is, right there.
Here it is. So this is the pour out your
There
wrath.
it is, there it is.
Yeah, but where's the pour out your love part?
It's down there.
It's that's the paragraph after it.
Yeah, it's the paragraph.
Oh,
right-
here it is.
Pour out your love.
So here's the whole thing. So this is what my Haggadah says. Or no, this is one version of it. So it says, pour out your love of the nations who've known you and the kingdoms who will call upon your name, for they have shown loving kindness to the seed of Jacob, and they defend your people Israel from those who devour them alive. May they live to see the sake of peace spread over your chosen ones and to participate in the joy of your nations. It's a very traditional blessing for people who you know,
God bless the czar.
yeah. No, it's not. It's no, it's
And
not.
keep him far away from
Far away
us.
from us.
No, it's not that. It's that there are people who have that have been good to protected the Jewish people, and they should be protected,
But it's pour out your fury on the nations, did you not know?
because that's for people who do not want to give it up. So for people who do not want to give up that text,
It's there.
then they can add that to that section, which is also okay. You said this, now we can also say this too. So this is for people who 100% don't want to take it out, who want to read every line of the Haggadah, and then they say, okay, then add this afterwards. So we don't do it. I don't do it. I just think it's interesting that that was part of the Haggadah. The part of the traditional Haggadah was this line. Okay, so
Makes sense.
yes, because on the night that God did this, maybe God will do it again. The hope is that God will come back and do this power. Now, I will tell you, it's a little bit more complicated than that, or actually more frightening than that, because what happened on Passover is that in some countries, Jews were worried that people would come in and say, "You're killing."
Pogroms, that's when the pogroms happened.
Yeah.
But it's Easter time and Passion plays.
Yes, and so this was a serious issue, because it wasn't just, let's just say this. Let's say it because tonight we really need that protection. Because tonight, this might be the night that our Gentile neighbors come over and say, we believe that you're using Christian babies for your matzah.
Where does this fall in the Haggadah?
Towards the end,
We've read it from.
towards the end.
It's right after the meal.
Yeah, it's when we do the Elijah welcoming in Elijah, which also,
You must have said it.
yes, which is the reason that we open the door for Elijah is not to let, it's not,
Let the Gentile neighbors know.
yes, it's to let our Gentile neighbors know that we're not killing babies. That's what it was for. That's what it was for. Elijah doesn't need a door open. If Elijah's Elijah, he can stand right in front of you and doesn't need a door open, right?
Most religious things, we do what we need to do, and then we give it a religious meaning.
Correct. So the idea of opening the door to make sure that we're not having a blood libel in our, is not going on in our house. We're lucky. We live like that. But our Gentile neighbors 1,000 years ago or 900 years ago might not have felt that way about us. And so we did it. And so now we can say, hey, we're letting in Elijah, but it was at this moment that we literally said, God, please protect us and please destroy these people before they kill us, which is the ultimate act of a people who are completely disenfranchised and completely powerless. I can't do anything but ask God to protect me because I can't protect myself. So this is part of the tradition of Haggadah, in the Haggadah, and now you know.
We choose the reading.
Now you
of
know.
The Passion narrative to make it less anti-Semitic.
Yes, and
Came directly from
the Gospels.
Very yes.
Yes, and so Christian liturgy, as Reverend Lynn is saying, has changed to not be as problematic and to get people all riled up to want to go out and kill their Jewish neighbors on Passover, which was ironic that, again, this season that was supposed to be bringing people together and thinking about connecting with God and renewal and freedom was a time that people were scared to death.
Thanks, Rosemary.
All right, everybody,
thank
take
you.
care, and we'll see you soon. Oh, don't forget, speaking of scarier times, The Forger, we're going to see The Forger Thursday night is our next movie at the Lemley. Takes place during the Holocaust. Yes, you can. Yes, there's, you can definitely come with us. And we'll see you tomorrow night as we read Numbers. Bye, everybody. Thanks,
Bye,
Rosie.
everybody.
Bye.